The distress call from Tesseril had been traveling for 9 days before anyone bothered to answer it, and the first 11 answers were all the same word, said 11 different ways, and the word was no. The Ashani were not a people who asked for help. That was the thing the wider galaxy did not understand about how bad it had become, and it was the thing that made the silence after each refusal so much heavier than silence usually was. The Ashani had been a proud and quiet people for 9,000 years, traders and gardeners and keepers of one green world. And in all those 9,000 years they had never once sent a call into the dark begging anyone to come and save them. They had their pride, and their pride had a shape, and the shape of it was that an Ashani did not ask. An Ashani endured, or an Ashani died, but an Ashani did not stand in the open and beg. So when the call went out from Tesseril, when the speaker of the dying world set aside 9,000 years of pride, and sent her voice into the void asking, plainly, for anyone to come, it should have told the galaxy everything it needed to know about how close to the end Tesseril had come. It did not. The galaxy heard a proud people begging, and decided, in 11 different council chambers, that a proud people begging was a proud people not worth the risk. The thing that was killing Tesseril had a name in the Ashani tongue that did not translate well, but the closest the human linguists would later come to it was the pale growth, and that name was both accurate and badly insufficient, the way the word fire is accurate for a thing that has burned your house down, and badly insufficient for what it took from you. The pale growth was alive. That was the first thing about it, and the worst. It was not a weapon, not a fleet, not an army. It was a living thing, or a colony of living things, a vast, slow, organic bloom that had drifted into the Tesseril system from somewhere out in the deep dark, on no course anyone could have predicted, and had taken root in the system's outer reaches, and begun, with the patient, mindless hunger of a growing thing, to eat. It ate metal. It ate rock. It ate, when it could reach it, the living green of a world, and it turned everything it ate into more of itself, more pale spreading tissue, more drifting spore sacs, more of the slow-reaching tendrils that crept across the void from one body to the next. It had eaten the Ashani outer colonies first, the mining stations and the orbital farms, and the Ashani had not understood at first what was happening, because nothing in 9,000 years had prepared them for an enemy that did not attack, that simply grew, that you could not negotiate with, or frighten, or fight in any way that made sense, because it had no mind to negotiate with, no fear to exploit, no center to strike. You could burn a patch of it, and it would grow back from the patch you missed. You could blast a tendril, and the spores from the blast would drift and root and become 10 new tendrils. It did not care that you fought it. It did not notice. It simply grew and ate and grew, and the Ashani had watched it eat its way inward toward their green homeworld, colony by colony, season by season, and had slowly come to understand that they were going to lose everything, and that there was nothing in all their 9,000 years of pride that could stop it. That was when the speaker had sent the call. The first to refuse were the Vorlish, whose worlds were nearest, and who refused fastest, because they were nearest. They had studied the pale growth from a safe distance, and had concluded, correctly, that it spread on spores, and that any ship which went near it risked carrying those spores home. The Vorlish were not cruel. They were afraid, and their fear was reasonable, and they sent their refusal politely, with regret, and quarantined the Tesseril system at their border, and turned away every ship that tried to flee through it, because a fleeing ship might carry the growth, and a single-rooted spore on a Vorlish world would be the end of the Vorlish. The second to refuse were the Koran, who had a great fleet and could have helped, and who said that they would not spend their warships on a thing their warships could not kill. The Koran were a martial people, and to them, the only worthwhile death was a death that took the enemy with it, and they could not see how to make the pale growth die, and so they could not see the point of dying near it. They sent their refusal as a single line, and the single line was, "There is no victory here," and they were not wrong, by the way they counted victory. The third refusal, and the fourth, and on through the 11th, were all variations on the first two. Too dangerous, cannot be killed, not worth the risk. The spores, always the spores. 11 empires looked at the dying world of Tesseril and at the pale spreading thing that was eating it, and 11 empires did the arithmetic. and the arithmetic always came out the same, which was that there was nothing to be gained by going to Tesseril, and a great deal to be lost, and so the answer was no, and the answer was no. By the time the call reached the 12th, the speaker of Tesseril had stopped expecting any answer at all. She had sent the call out of duty, into the dark, to anyone, and the dark had answered 11 times with the same word, and she had begun, in the quiet of her own heart, to prepare her people for the end. She had begun to plan the last gardens, the ones the Ashani planted when a world was dying, so that even at the end, there would be something green to look at, so that the last of her people would not have to die looking at the pale spreading thing that was killing them, but could die instead, looking at flowers. She was in one of those last gardens, on her knees in the green, when word came that a ship had turned. It was not a fleet, it was not an empire. It was a single ship, a human ship, far out past the Vorlish quarantine, that had heard the call 9 days late, the way everyone had heard it, 9 days late, and had done a thing that none of the 11 nearer, larger, stronger empires had done. It had turned its bow toward Tesseril, and lit its engines, and started to come. It is worth understanding what the 11 refusals had done to the Ashani, because a people can survive almost anything except the slow proof that no one is coming. The Ashani were gardeners by nature and by history. Their whole civilization had grown out of the tending of growing things, and their proudest art, the thing they were known for across this part of the dark, was a kind of living architecture, gardens grown over generations into shapes of impossible beauty, tended by families who passed the tending down from parent to child for centuries. A great Ashani garden was never finished. It was a conversation between the living and the dead and the not yet born, a thing that one generation began, and another continued, and a third would complete, and to be entrusted with the tending of one was the highest honor an Ashani could hold. The speaker of Tesseril, whose name was Iraway, had tended the oldest garden on the homeworld, the Garden of First Roots, which had been growing for 9,000 years, since the first Ashani who ever set seed in Tesseril's soil. It was the heart of her people, that garden, the living proof of 9,000 years of patience and care. And when the pale growth reached the homeworld and began to creep toward it across the green hemisphere, Iraway had understood that she was going to watch the Garden of First Roots die, and that there was nothing she could do, and that when it died, something 9,000 years old would die with it, that could never be grown again. That was the thing the 11 empires had not understood when they did their arithmetic. They had counted 40 million lives, and 40 million lives was a great many, but it was a number, and a number is a thing the mind can hold at a distance. What they had not counted, because they could not see it, was the Garden of First Roots, and the 9,000 years in it, and the families who had tended it across 300 generations, and all the other gardens, and all the other histories, and the simple unbearable fact that a people is not just its living members, but everything its living members are carrying for the dead and the unborn, and that when a people dies, all of that dies with them, all at once, forever. Iraway had sent the call 11 times into the dark, and 11 times the dark had answered no, and each no had taken something from her. Not hope exactly, because she had set hope aside early, knowing it would only hurt, but something quieter and more essential, a kind of faith that the universe contained, somewhere in it, anyone who would come. By the 11th no, she had stopped sending. She had gone instead to the Garden of First Roots, to the part of it that the growth had not yet reached, and she had begun, with her own hands, to plant the last garden, the small ceremonial planting the Ashani made when a world was ending, a garden of the flowers her people loved best, so that when the end came, the last of the Ashani would have something green and beautiful to die looking at, instead of the pale spreading thing that was killing them. She had been planting those flowers, on her knees in the soil of the oldest garden in the world, making her peace with the silence of a universe that had told her people 11 times that they were not worth the trouble, when an attendant had come running across the green to tell her, breathless, disbelieving, that a ship had turned. She had not stood up at first. She had not let herself believe it. She had heard 11 no's, and an 11-time refused people learns not to believe in the 12th answer, because the 12th answer is just one more way to be hurt. She had kept planting, her hands in the soil, and she had said, quietly, to the attendant, "It is a ship passing through. It is not coming here. No one is coming here. Go and tend your own garden, child, while there is still time to tend it. And the attendant had said, No, speaker. It crossed the Vorlish line. Ships do not cross the Vorlish line by accident. It crossed the line, and it is burning its engines, and it is coming here, to us, to Tesseril. And only then, kneeling in the soil of a garden 9,000 years old, with the last flowers half planted around her, had Irue of Tesseril allowed herself to do the thing she had not done since the first no, the thing that frightened her more than the dying had, because it could be taken away. She had allowed herself to hope. The ship was called the Steadfast, and the decision to turn it toward Tesseril had taken its captain about 4 minutes, which her crew would later agree was 4 minutes longer than they had expected. Captain Cora Whitfield was 41 years old, and she had spent most of her career doing a thing the human fleet did that the rest of the galaxy found difficult to categorize. The Steadfast was a warship. There was no mistaking that. It was 900 meters of armored hull. It carried weapons that could open a planet's crust, and it had fought, when it had to, with the cold efficiency that had made human warships a thing the galaxy spoke about in lowered voices. But the Steadfast was also something else, something the human fleet had decided long ago that its warships should be, and that decision was written into every deck of the ship, and into the woman who commanded it. The Steadfast was a rescue ship. It carried, alongside its weapons, the largest medical bay of any vessel its size, a hold built to take aboard tens of thousands of refugees, water makers, and air scrubbers, and food printers, enough to keep a small city alive, and a crew, trained as much in saving lives as in ending them. The humans had a phrase for it that did not translate cleanly into any other tongue, and the phrase was, "A warship is only worth its guns if it is also worth its mercy." And Cora Whitfield had built her whole career on the back half of that sentence. She had been a rescue officer before she was a captain. She had pulled survivors out of burning stations and sinking habitats, and the cold wreckage of a dozen disasters, and she had learned, in all those years, the one lesson that she carried into the captain's chair, and that would carry her to Tesseril. The lesson was simple, and most of the galaxy never learned it, and it was this: that the moment you start asking whether the people in trouble are worth saving, you have already lost the thing that made you worth being saved by. So when the call from Tesseril reached the Steadfast, 9 days late, far out past the Vorlish line, and her communications officer read it out on the bridge, and her tactical officer immediately laid out, in clear and correct terms, every reason it would be madness to go, Cora Whitfield listened to all of it, and then she asked a single question. How many Ashani are still alive on that world? The communications officer checked. The speaker's last estimate was 40 million, Captain. But that was 9 days ago. It will be fewer now. 40 million, Whitfield said. And 11 empires have told them no. 12 if we count ourselves, the tactical officer said. He was not being cruel. He was being honest, which was his job. Captain, I have to put this plainly, because if I do not, I am not doing my duty. That thing eats metal. It eats hulls. It spreads on spores that root in anything organic. If we go in there, the most likely outcome is that the Steadfast becomes part of it, and the second most likely outcome is that we carry it out with us and seed it somewhere new, and there is no outcome on my board where we go in there and come out clean and victorious. The Corin were right. There is no victory here. You are correct about the tactics, Whitfield said. You are completely correct, and I want it logged that you said it, because you were right to say it. She stood. And we are going anyway. Not because there is a victory in it. There is not. We are going because there are 40 million people on that world who set aside 9,000 years of pride to ask the Dark for help, and the Dark has told them no 11 times, and I am not going to be the 12th voice in the dark that tells a dying people they are not worth the trouble. That is not what this ship is for. That is not what I am for. She looked around the bridge, at all of them. I am not ordering anyone to want this. I am ordering us to do it. There is a difference, and you do not have to like the order to follow it well. Helm, bring us about. Lay in a course for Tesseril, best speed. Tactical. You have the next 6 days to find me the thing you say is not there. The way to make this work. I have read your file. You are very good at finding things that are not there. Find me this one. The tactical officer looked at her for a long moment. He was a careful man, and he had told her the truth. and she had heard it and overruled it without dismissing it, which was a thing he had not often seen a captain do. And then he did the thing that human crews did, the thing that was, in the end, the reason the human ships were so hard to stop. He stopped arguing about whether it could be done and started working on how. "Aye, Captain," he said. 6 days. I will find you something." It took the tactical officer 4 of his 6 days to find the thing that was not there, and when he found it, he brought it to the captain at the middle of the night watch, because he had not slept and he could not wait until morning. His name was Tomas Aldridge, and he had not slept in 4 days, and his eyes were red and his hands were not quite steady, and he was, for the first time since the call had come, almost smiling. "You cannot kill it, Captain," he said, laying his work out across the ready room table. "I want to start there, because it is still true. You cannot kill the pale growth. It has no center, no brain, no heart. You can burn 1,000 tons of it, and it grows back from the spores you scattered doing it. Anyone who goes in there meaning to kill it is going to die there, and they will deserve to, for being a fool. So we are not going to kill it." He paused. "We are going to teach it to die." "Explain," Whitfield said. "It is alive," Aldridge said. "That is the thing everyone keeps treating as the problem. The Koran looked at a living enemy and saw a thing they could not kill, because they fight with weapons, and a weapon is for killing things that can die from being hit. But a living thing, Captain, a living thing is not just a thing you cannot kill. A living thing is a thing that has needs. It eats. It grows. It reproduces. And everything that eats and grows and reproduces has, somewhere, a thing it cannot survive the lack of. A weakness that is not a place you can shoot, but a need you can starve." He brought up the data the human probes had been gathering for 4 days, as the Steadfast closed on the system, the long, careful readings of the pale growth that no one had bothered to take before, because no one had been planning to do anything but stay away. "It eats metal and rock and biomass," Aldridge said, "but it does not run on those. Those are building material. What it runs on, what it needs, what every cell of it cannot live without, is heat. It is a cold space organism. It evolved out in the deep dark between the stars, where there is almost no heat at all, and it survives there by being almost perfectly efficient with what little heat it can find. It hoards heat the way a desert thing hoards water. It builds its whole body around capturing and holding and using every scrap of warmth, because in the deep dark, warmth is the thing there is never enough of." He looked up, and then it drifted into the tessaril system, into the warmth of a star, and for the first time in its whole long existence, there was heat everywhere, more heat than it had ever known. And it did the thing a starving creature does when it finally finds food. It gorged. It grew faster than it had ever grown. It bloomed. The thing that is killing tessaril is a creature drunk on warmth, eating everything in reach because for the first time it can. "And if you take the warmth away," Whitfield said slowly, beginning to see it. "If you take the warmth away," Aldridge said, "it does not die. It is far too tough to simply die, but it stops being able to grow. It stops being able to spread. It pulls itself in, every cell of it, and it goes dormant, the way it must have been dormant for the millions of years it drifted in the dark, a hard, cold, sleeping thing, waiting for warmth that is not coming. It cannot be killed, but it can be put back to sleep. And a thing that is asleep, Captain, a thing that is dormant and cold and pulled in tight, is a thing you can wrap up and tow out of a system and drop back into the deep dark where it came from, where it will sleep on harmlessly until the end of time." Whitfield looked at the data for a long moment. "You want to take the heat away from a thing that lives in the warmth of a star," she said. "In a whole star system. How does a single ship do that?" "We do not take the heat away from the system," Aldridge said. "We cannot, but we do not have to. The growth is not spread evenly. It has a densest part, a core mass, the oldest and largest body of it, out in the system's cold outer dark where it first took root. Everything else is tendrils and spore clouds reaching inward from that core. If we can put the core mass to sleep, the tendrils starve, because they were all feeding warmth back to the core, and a body that loses its core pulls in and goes dormant on its own. We do not have to put the whole growth to sleep. We have to put the heart of it to sleep, the one part that is not really a heart, and the rest follows." "And how do we put the core to sleep?" Aldridge smiled then, fully, the tired, wild smile of a man who has found the thing that was not there. "We are a human warship, Captain," he said. "We carry the coldest thing in the galaxy that humans know how to make. We were always going to bring it. I just had to figure out what to point it at." The 6 days of the approach were not easy days aboard the Steadfast, and Cora Whitfield did not pretend they were. She had told her crew the truth, that there was no victory in the tactical sense, that the thing they were flying toward could not be killed, that the most likely outcome was that they would die at Tesseril or carry its death home with them, she had told them, and then she had ordered them to go anyway, and a crew that has been told the truth and ordered into danger is a crew that has a great deal of time to sit with that truth on a 6-day approach, and some of them sat with it badly. There was grumbling, there always was, and Whitfield did not punish it, because a crew that cannot grumble is a crew that is keeping its fear bottled, and bottled fear is far more dangerous than spoken fear. She let them grumble. She walked the ship, the way the best human captains did, and she listened to the grumbling, and where she could, she answered it, and where she could not, she simply let it be heard, because sometimes a frightened person does not need an answer, only to be heard by someone who is not afraid. On the 3rd day, in the mess, she overheard a young rating saying to another, low, that it was madness, that they were throwing the ship away on aliens who would not have crossed a street to help a human, that the Koran and the Vorlish were cowards, but they were not fools, and maybe the fools were the ones flying into the thing that ate ships. And Whitfield, who had been getting her own meal, sat down across from the young rating, uninvited, and did not pull rank, and asked the rating to say it again, to her face, because she wanted to hear it. The rating, mortified, said it again, more quietly. "You might be right," Whitfield said, when he had finished. "That is the thing I want you to understand. You might be completely right. Maybe the Ashani would not have crossed a street for us. I do not know. I have never met an Ashani. And here is the thing, rating. The thing I need you to carry into this with me." She leaned forward. "It does not matter. Whether they would have helped us is a question about who they are. Whether we help them is a question about who we are. And I am not going to let who they might be decide who I am. If I only help the people who would have helped me back, then I am just running a trade. And there is no mercy in a trade, there is only accounting. The whole point of mercy, the only thing that makes it worth anything, is that you give it to people who have not earned it and might never repay it, because they are drowning and you have a boat. That is all. They are drowning. We have a boat. The rest is accounting. And I did not join a rescue ship to be an accountant." The young rating looked at her for a long moment. "I'm still scared, Captain," he said. "Good," Whitfield said. "So am I. A captain who tells you she is not scared flying into that thing is lying to you, and you should never trust a captain who lies to you about being scared, because the next thing she will lie to you about is whether you are going to be all right. I am scared. I am going anyway. Those two things live together just fine. I have carried them together my whole career. You will learn to carry them too." She stood and clapped him once on the shoulder. "Finish your meal. We have 3 more days. And rating, when this is over, and it works, because it is going to work, I want you to remember that you said it was madness, and that you went anyway, and that the going anyway is the part you will be proud of for the rest of your life. The fear you will forget. The going anyway you will keep." And the young rating did keep it, for the rest of his life, exactly as she had said. Years later, with gray in his hair and a rescue command of his own, he would sit down across from a frightened young crewman who was saying it was madness, and he would ask the crewman to say it again, to his face. And he would tell him about a captain who had done the same for him on the way to a world that should have died, and he would understand, the way you only understand such things in hindsight, that the thing she had given him in that mess was not courage exactly but permission. Permission to be afraid and useful at the same time, which is the only kind of courage that has ever actually existed. The Steadfast crossed the Vorlish quarantine line on the 5th day, and the Vorlish tried to stop it, and that was the first time on the voyage that Cora Whitfield let the galaxy see the front half of the sentence her ship was built around. The Vorlish picket commander hailed the Steadfast on every channel at once, and his voice was tight with the particular anger of a frightened person watching someone else do a dangerous thing. The Tesseril system was under quarantine. Nothing crossed the line, in or out. The Steadfast would turn back, or the Vorlish picket would be forced to fire on it. and the picket was 11 warships strong, and the Steadfast was 1. Whitfield answered him herself, calmly, while her ship did not slow down. "Picket Commander," she said, "I understand your quarantine, and I will honor the half of it that matters. Nothing the pale growth could ride will cross your line coming out. I give you my word, and I will show you the protocols. And when this is done, you may inspect my hull down to the rivets before I go home. I have no wish to seed your worlds with this thing. I have read what it does, and I would sooner die than carry it to you. But I am crossing your line going in, and I am crossing it now, because there are 40 million people behind it who have been told no 11 times, and I am not number 12. You will doom us all," the Vorlish commander said. "One ship cannot help them. You will only die there, or worse, you will spread it. I cannot allow it. I will fire." "You can fire," Whitfield said, and her voice did not change at all, which was somehow more frightening than if it had. "You have 11 ships. I have 1. And I will tell you, Commander, as one professional to another, with no anger in it, that if you fire on a rescue ship trying to reach a dying world, you had better kill me with the first salvo, because if you do not, I will not turn back, and I will not fight you, but I will go through you, and your 11 ships are pickets built to turn away frightened refugees, and my 1 ship is a human warship, built to go where it is needed, and not stop, and we both know how that ends. I do not want to teach you that lesson. You do not want to learn it, so let me pass. Honor your quarantine on the side that matters, and let us both keep the ships we have. I am going in either way. The only thing you get to choose is whether you are a footnote in this or a casualty of it." There was a long silence on the channel. The Vorlish commander was not a fool, and he was not, underneath the fear, a bad man. He had 11 ships, and his orders were clear, and he had every right to fire. But he had also heard the thing in the human captain's voice, the complete and quiet absence of any doubt, the way she had said, "I will go through you," not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact, the way one states the time. He had grown up, like everyone in this part of the dark, on the stories about the human ships, the ones the older species told the younger ones in lowered voices, and he had always half believed the stories were exaggerated. He found, in that long silence, that he did not want to find out whether they were. "Honor the quarantine coming out," he said at last, "and we will not fire going in. And, Captain," he paused, "I hope you are wrong about there being no victory. I hope you find one, for what it is worth, from a coward who would not cross his own line. I hope you save them." "It is worth a great deal," Whitfield said. "Thank you, Commander. Watch the line behind me. When I come out, I will come out clean. You have my word." And the Steadfast crossed the Vorlish quarantine, and the 11 picket ships did not fire, and the 1 human warship went on alone into the dying system that 11 empires had given up for dead. What it found there was worse than the data had prepared anyone for. The outer system was already gone. The Steadfast came in through what had once been the Ashani mining belt, and there was nothing left of it that anyone would have called a mining belt. The pale growth had been here for a season, and a season was enough. Where there had been stations and ships and the long, careful infrastructure of a 9,000-year-old people, there was now only the growth, vast pale reefs of it, spreading from rock to rock across the dark, glowing with a soft, sick inner light, its tendrils reaching and joining and reaching again, a slow-living tide that had eaten an entire region of a star system and turned it into more of itself. It was beautiful, in the way that the worst things sometimes are. The bridge crew of the Steadfast watched it on the forward screens in silence, the great pale blooms drifting past, the spore clouds catching the distant starlight, and more than one of them felt the particular horror of a thing that is killing a world and does not even know it, that has no malice in it, that is only doing what every living thing does, which is to grow and eat and become more of itself, and that happens to be doing it at the scale of a civilization. "It does not even know we are here," said Aldridge, very quietly, watching it. 40 million people are dying, and the thing killing them does not know they exist. It is just hungry. It is just warm for the first time, and hungry, and growing. "That is what makes it terrible," Whitfield said. "An enemy that hates you, you can fight. A thing that does not even know you are alive while it eats your world, there is no fighting that. There is only stopping it. Tactical. Where is the core mass? Deep system, Captain. Out past the third planet's orbit, in the cold dark where it first took root. It is the densest, oldest, largest body of the growth, exactly as the data predicted. Everything else is reaching inward from it, toward the homeworld. He paused. Captain, the homeworld. You should see the homeworld. He put it on the screen. Tesseril had been a green world. The records said so, the old survey data. The Ashani's own proud images of a planet of gardens and shallow seas and forests that had been tended for 9,000 years. The world on the screen was still mostly green, and that was the worst part, because across one whole hemisphere of it, creeping in from the night side, came the pale leading edge of the growth, a vast white frost of living tissue that had reached the surface and begun to spread across the gardens, turning the green to pale, eating the forests that 9,000 years of Ashani had tended. And you could see, even from orbit, the line where the green ended and the pale began, and you could see that the line was moving. How long, Whitfield asked, until it reaches the inhabited continent? At the current rate of spread, Aldridge said, 11 days, maybe 12. Then we have 11 days, Whitfield said. Helm, take us to the core mass. Best speed. Tactical. The moment we are in range, I want every reading you can take of it. We have one shot at this, and I will not waste it on a guess. Medical, I want the refugee holds opened and ready. If this works, we are going to have a very great many frightened people to take aboard. And if it does not work, we are going to take aboard as many as we can carry and run for the line. Communications. She paused. Raise the speaker of Tesseril. Tell her a ship has come. Tell her she is not alone anymore. The communications officer, a young woman named Della Mott, sent the message down to the dying world, and it was a little while before the answer came back. Because the Ashani had stopped listening for answers a long time ago, and it took them a moment to believe one had arrived. When the speaker's voice came up on the bridge, it was old and tired, and it had in it the particular flatness of someone who has spent a long time preparing to die and has made their peace with it, so that the news that they might not have to die is almost harder to bear than the dying would have been. You are the human ship, the speaker said, the one that turned. We saw you cross the Vorlish line. We did not believe it. A pause. 11 empires told us no, human captain. Why did you turn? Because you asked, Whitfield said. That is the whole reason. You asked, and I heard you. And turning was the only thing I could do and still be the kind of ship I am. I will not lie to you, speaker. What I am about to try has never been done, and it may not work. But I have a plan, and it is a good plan, and I have a crew who will not stop until it is finished, or we are. So I need you to do one thing for me, and it is the hardest thing, and it is this. She paused. I need you to hope, just for 11 days. I know your people set that aside a long time ago. I am asking you to pick it back up, just for 11 days, because I am going to need your people calm and ready to move, and frightened people who have given up do not move well. Tell them a ship has come, tell them to hope, and then let me get to work. There was a long silence from the dying world. And then the speaker of Tesseril, who had been on her knees in a last garden, planting flowers for her people to die looking at, stood up, and her voice when she spoke again was not flat anymore. I will tell them, she said. Work, human captain. We will hope. It has been a long time, but we remember how. While Aldridge worked on the core mass, and the well charged toward the operation, Cora Whitfield did a thing that her tactical officer thought was a waste of time, and that she knew was not. She sent a shuttle down to the homeworld, ahead of the operation, before anything had been proven, before there was any victory to celebrate, carrying a small team of her medics and herself. She did it because she had learned, over a long career, that a frightened people will hold together far better for a danger they can see being fought than for one they are only told is being fought, and because the Ashani had been alone for a season, and a people that has been alone for a season needs, more than food or medicine, to see a face that has come for them. The shuttle came down through a sky still hazed with spore dust, over a continent that was mostly still green, but edged everywhere with the gray of dormant growth, now that the inner tendrils had begun to pull in, and it landed on a wide stone plaza at the edge of the Garden of First Roots, where the speaker was waiting. Iraway was older than Whitfield had expected, and smaller. and there was in her the particular stillness of someone who has spent a long time preparing to die and is not yet sure they are allowed to stop. She stood at the edge of the great garden, and behind her, stretching away green and impossible, was 9,000 years of patient tending, and at the far edge of it, gray and frozen now, was the place where the growth had reached before the operation began to starve it. "You came down," Irue said, "before you had won, before you knew you would win. Why?" "Because your people needed to see that someone had come," Whitfield said. "Not hear it, see it. A voice from orbit is a thing you can stop believing in. A person standing in your garden is harder to disbelieve. I wanted them to see a face. I wanted you to see one." She looked out over the garden. "And I wanted to see this, the thing you are fighting for. I have read that the Ashani are gardeners. I did not understand, until now, what that meant." Irue was quiet for a moment. "This garden is 9,000 years old," she said. "My family has tended this part of it for 300 generations. I learned to tend it from my mother, who learned it from hers, back and back further than any record we keep. When the growth came, I understood that I would be the one to watch it die. The last keeper of a thing 9,000 years old. I made my peace with it. I came here to plant a last garden, the small one, the kind we plant when a world is ending, so that my people would have flowers to die looking at." She gestured to a patch of half-planted soil near her feet, where small bright flowers stood in careful rows, unfinished. "I was planting it when they told me you had turned." Whitfield looked at the half-planted last garden, and something moved in her face. "Finish it," she said. "It is a death garden, human captain. If you save us, there is no need for it." "Finish it anyway," Whitfield said. "Not as a death garden, as the first thing that grew after. Let it be the garden you planted on the day you decided to hope again, the day the dark answered. Your people will want a place to mark that. Let this be it." She paused. "I cannot tend a garden, speaker. It is not a thing my people are good at. We are better at the loud and the fast than the slow and the patient. But I can give you the time to tend yours. That is what a rescue ship is. It is not a thing that fixes your world for you. It is a thing that gives you back the time to fix it yourself. The garden is yours. I am only here to make sure you get to keep tending it." While they spoke, the medics had begun to move out among the Ashani who had gathered at the edge of the plaza, the sick and the starving and the grief-worn, and the Ashani had drawn back at first, because they were a private people and unused to the touch of strangers, and then, slowly, as the medics worked, as the food and the water and the simple unhurried care began to reach them, they had stopped drawing back. There is a thing that happens when a people who have given up on being helped discover that they are being helped, and it is not loud, with the Ashani, who were not a loud people, but it is unmistakable, and Whitfield saw it ripple out across the plaza, a kind of slow disbelieving thaw, as 40 million people, through these few hundred at the plaza's edge, began to understand that they were not going to die after all. An Ashani child, very small, came up to Whitfield while she stood at the edge of the garden, and looked up at her for a long time with the wide, unblinking eyes of the very young, and then held out, in both hands, a single flower, one of the bright ones from the half-planted garden, pressed on the human captain, with the grave seriousness that small children bring to the giving of important things. Whitfield knelt down and took the flower, and held it as carefully as if it were the most fragile thing aboard her ship, which in a way it was. "Thank you," she said to the child. "I will keep it. I will keep it where I can see it. And when I am old, and someone asks me why I turned my ship around when 11 empires would not, I am going to tell them about a garden, and a flower, and a child who gave it to me before I had even won. That will be my answer. That has always been my answer. I just did not have the flower yet." The weapon that Aldridge had meant when he said the coldest thing in the galaxy that humans know how to make was not, in fact, a weapon at all, which was exactly why it was going to work. The Steadfast, like every human deep rescue vessel, carried a thing the crew called the Well. It was a containment system, a great insulated tank that ran through the heart of the ship, and its purpose, in normal service, was to make and hold the super-cold fluids that a rescue ship needs, the cryogenic stores that kept the medical bay's most fragile patients alive, that fed the ship's coldest systems, that let the Steadfast do the kind of long-haul rescue work that required keeping things colder than the space around them for months at a time. It was not built to fight, it was built to preserve, and it could, when fully charged and fully vented all at once, produce a single overwhelming pulse of cold, a wave of absolute heat hunger that would reach out and drink the warmth from everything around it. In normal service, you would never vent the well all at once. It would take weeks to rebuild, and it would leave the ship's cold systems empty, and the ship itself, for a time, far more fragile than a warship had any business being. It was the kind of thing a captain did exactly once, in exactly the circumstance where nothing else would do. This was that circumstance. The plan was simple to say, and very hard to do. The Steadfast would close on the core mass of the pale growth, the great old dense heart of it out in the cold dark, and it would get close, closer than was safe, close enough that the spore clouds would be drifting against its hull, and the tendrils would be reaching for it, and it would hold there, in the most dangerous place in the system, long enough to charge the well to its absolute limit. And then it would vent the well, all of it, in a single pulse, directly into the core mass, and it would drink every scrap of warmth out of the heart of the thing that was killing Tesseril, and the heart would go cold, and dormant, and the rest of the growth, robbed of the core it fed, would pull in and follow it down into sleep. The danger was the closeness, and the time. To charge the well to the level Aldridge needed, the Steadfast would have to sit beside the core mass for nearly an hour, and for that whole hour, the ship would be inside the reach of the growth, with spores rooting on its hull, and tendrils reaching for its seams, and the growth would not attack it, because the growth had no idea it was being attacked. But the growth would do the thing it did to everything, which was to try to grow on it and eat it, and a ship being slowly eaten while it sat still for an hour was a ship in very great danger indeed. This is the part, Whitfield told her crew, before they began, that the Corin could not stomach, and I do not blame them, because it goes against every instinct a fighting crew has. We are going to fly into the heart of the thing, and we are going to sit there, and we are going to let it crawl on us, and we are not going to fire a shot, because firing a shot scatters spores, and makes it worse, and because the well needs every scrap of power we have, and we cannot spare any for the guns. For 1 hour, we are going to be the bait in our own trap, and we are going to take it, and we are going to hold, and we are not going to flinch. The damage control teams will keep it off the critical systems. The hull will hold. I have read the numbers, and it will hold. For an hour, if we keep it clear of the seams. And at the end of the hour, we vent the well, and we end this. Does everyone understand? They understood, and they did not like it, and they did it anyway, which was, as ever, the whole of what made them what they were. The Steadfast flew into the heart of the pale growth. The hour that the Steadfast spent in the heart of the pale growth was the longest hour of Cora Whitfield's life, and she had spent some long hours. The core mass was a thing the human language did not have good words for. From a distance, it had looked like a pale reef. Up close, with the Steadfast hanging in its shadow, it was a wall, a slow-living cliff of glowing tissue that stretched past the limits of every screen, pulsing very faintly with the rhythm of whatever passed for its life, and from its face reached the tendrils, hundreds of them, thousands, drifting and questing and reaching, and as the Steadfast settled into position, the nearest of them found the hull and began, with the mindless patience of a growing thing, to spread across it. The crew felt it. That was the part no one had quite been ready for. They could hear it, through the hull, a soft, dry, creeping whisper as the growth crawled across the armor, searching for a way in, rooting where it could, and the damage control teams moved through the ship in their sealed suits, burning the spores off the critical seams with handheld heat lances, and it was slow, ugly, close work, the kind of work that wears on the nerves, far worse than a battle does, because in a battle you are doing something, and here they could only hold, and clear, and hold, and clear, while the thing crawled on them, and the clock counted down, and the well charged, point by point, toward the level it needed. 20 minutes, Aldridge reported. His voice was steady. Everyone's voice was steady. That was a thing about this crew, about all human crews. The worse it got, the steadier they got, because they had learned that steadiness was a thing you gave each other, a thing that traveled around a crew and held it together, and a crew that stayed steady could outlast almost anything, well at 60%, holding charge. The growth reached the forward sensor array and began to spread across it, and the screens dimmed, And Whitfield ordered the array cleared, and a damage control team went out onto the hull, in the shadow of the great pale cliff, and burned the growth off the sensors with their heat lances, while it reached for them in the dark, and they did not flinch, and they came back in, and the screens cleared, and the count went on. 40 minutes, well at 80%. A tendril found a maintenance seam on the lower hull, and rooted in it before the damage control team could reach it, and for a few bad minutes, it grew inward, into the gap between the armor plates, and the team had to cut it out by hand, tracing it back to its root and burning every scrap of it before it could spread into the ship's interior. And they got it. They got all of it, because they were good, and they were stubborn, and they did not stop. But it was close, and everyone on the bridge knew it had been close. 50 minutes, Aldridge said. Well, at 95%. Captain, we are almost there. A few more minutes. And it was in those last few minutes, with the growth crawling thick across the hull and the well climbing toward full, and the whole ship holding its breath, that the thing happened which no one had predicted, because no one had understood the pale growth well enough to predict it. It noticed the cold. Not as a mind notices a threat. It had no mind, but the well, charging to full in the heart of the ship, had begun to leak the faintest edge of its hunger into the space around the steadfast, the first whisper of the cold to come, and the growth, which was built around the capturing and hoarding of warmth, felt that whisper of cold the way a plant feels the first frost, and it did the thing a cold-fearing organism does. It recoiled. The tendrils that had been crawling across the hull began, all at once, to pull back, to retreat from the ship that had suddenly begun to feel cold, and for a moment, the bridge crew thought the operation had been discovered, that the growth was somehow fighting back. It is pulling away from us, Mott reported, alarmed. All across the hull, it is retreating. Let it, Whitfield said, and a fierce understanding came into her voice. Let it pull back. It feels the cold coming. It is doing exactly what Aldridge said it would do at the end. It is trying to get away from the frost. She leaned forward. Aldridge, it is pulling back toward the core mass, toward the densest part of itself. It is gathering itself in, away from us. Is that what I think it is? Aldridge looked at his board, and his tired face went still, and then it broke into the wild, tired smile one more time. It is concentrating, Captain, he said. It is pulling all its warmth in toward the core, away from the cold, packing itself tight to protect its heat. It is making the core denser. It is making the core warmer. He laughed, once, in disbelief. It is doing our work for us. It feels the frost coming, and it is huddling, and the huddle is putting more of itself than ever right in front of us, all packed together, all the warmth it has gathered from a whole star system concentrated into one place, right where we are about to vent the well. He looked up. Captain, it could not have arranged itself more perfectly for us if it had wanted to. The well is at 99%. Whitfield stood. Then we do not give it the chance to finish huddling, she said. Aldridge. The well. All of it. Now. Among the damage control teams who spent that hour out on the hull, burning the pale growth off the seams while it crawled and reached in the dark, was a young technician named Sella Voigt, and what she did out there was the kind of thing that never makes it into the songs, which is a shame, because it was the whole reason the songs got to be sung. Voigt was 26. She had trained for hull work, for the slow, careful business of keeping a ship's skin intact, and she had never imagined that the skill would be tested like this, out in the shadow of a living cliff, 1,000 times the size of her ship, with a thing that had eaten a star system crawling across the armor under her boots, reaching for the seams she was sworn to protect. There is a particular terror in working on the outside of a ship that is being slowly eaten, and Voigt felt all of it, and she did the work anyway, because the work was hers and no one else was going to do it. When the tendril rooted in the lower maintenance seam, the one that grew inward into the gap between the armor plates, it was Voigt's team that went after it. The tendril had got further than any of them had seen one get, deep into the seam, reaching toward the ship's interior, and the standard procedure was to seal the section and burn it from inside. But sealing the section would have meant cutting power to a run of cooling lines that the well needed, and the well was at 90%, and climbing, and the operation depended on it, and so sealing the section was not an option anyone wanted to take. Voigt made the call that the team would talk about afterward, She went into the seam after the tendril. It was not a thing the procedures recommended. It was barely a thing the procedures allowed. She wedged herself into the narrow gap between the armor plates, in her sealed suit, with a heat lance in one hand, and she followed the tendril down into the dark of the seam, tracing it back toward its root, burning it as she went, scrap by scrap, while it writhed and reached around her, in a space barely wide enough for her shoulders. She could not see well, she could not move well, and she could feel, through her suit, the dry cold creep of the growth all around her, reaching, rooting, trying to grow on the suit itself, and she kept going, because if she did not get the root, the tendril would grow back, and if it grew back into the ship's interior, the whole interior was at risk, and the well, and the operation, and 40 million people. She got the root. It took her 4 minutes, alone, wedged in a gap in the hull with a living thing reaching around her in the dark, and she traced the tendril all the way back to the place where it had first taken hold, and she burned that place down to clean metal, every scrap, until there was nothing left of the root at all, and then she backed out of the seam, slowly, painfully, and her team pulled her free, and she sat down on the hull in the shadow of the great pale cliff, and shook for a moment, and then she got up, because the hour was not over, and there was more growth to burn. No one ordered her into that seam. That was the thing. The captain on the bridge never even knew it had happened until afterward, when she read the damage control logs and found, in the dry technical language of a hull report, the words, Technician Voigt, entered seam 14 lower in pressure suit, and removed root mass by hand. Operation continued without power interruption to well systems, and understood what those words had cost, and what they had bought. It is a thing the galaxy never quite grasped about the human ships, why they were so hard to stop, why a single one could do what 11 empires would not. It was not the weapons, or the wells, or the captains, though all of those mattered. It was that, on a human ship, there was always, somewhere, in some dark, dangerous place, that no enemy would ever see, and no song would ever name, a Sela Voigt, 26 years old, and terrified, wedging herself into a gap in the hull to burn a root out by hand, not because anyone ordered her to, but because the job was hers, and the job mattered, and she was not going to let it fail on her watch. Multiply that by a crew, multiply it by a fleet. That, and not the guns, was the thing the galaxy had learned to fear. The venting of the well was not a thing the eye could see, and that was strange, because it was the most important thing the Steadfast ever did. There was no beam, there was no blast. A weapon makes a show of itself, and the well was not a weapon. What happened, when Aldridge released it, was that all the cold the Steadfast had been hoarding for months, the deep absolute heat hunger of the great insulated tank that ran through the ship's heart, was vented out in a single silent pulse, a wave of pure cold that reached out from the human ship into the huddled, gathered, warmth-packed core of the pale growth, and drank. It drank the warmth out of the heart of the thing that had eaten a star system. It drank the heat the growth had spent a whole season gathering, the warmth of mining stations and orbital farms and forests 9,000 years old, all of it concentrated now into one dense huddled mass, and the cold reached into that mass and took the warmth out of it the way a sponge takes water, all at once, completely, and the core of the pale growth, which had been pulsing very faintly with the rhythm of its strange slow life, went still. The bridge crew watched it on the screens. There was nothing to see, at first, and then there was everything to see. The great pale cliff that had filled every screen, the glowing reef of living tissue, began to change. Its soft inner light dimmed, and dimmed further, and went out. Its slow, faint pulse stopped. The questing tendrils, frozen mid-reach, stopped reaching. And across the whole vast body of the core mass, a hard gray dormancy spread, the deep cold sleep that the growth fell into in the deep dark between stars, the sleep it had not slept since it drifted into the warmth of Tesseril's sun, and gorged itself awake. It did not die. It could not die. It was far too tough for that. It slept. The heart of the thing went cold and hard and dormant, a great dead-still mass hanging in the dark, and the warmth that had driven it was gone. And then, all across the Tesseril system, the rest of the growth began to follow it down. This was the part Aldridge had promised, and the part no one had quite let themselves believe. The tendrils reaching inward toward the homeworld, the spore clouds drifting through the inner system, the pale frost creeping across the green hemisphere of Tesseril itself. All of it had been fed by the core. All of it had been reaching warmth back to that gathered heart. And now the heart was cold and asleep, and gave nothing back. And one by one, region by region, the rest of the growth felt the loss of its core, and did the only thing a cold space organism could do when its warmth failed. It pulled in, it went dormant. The creeping frost on the homeworld stopped creeping. The tendrils stopped reaching. The whole vast living tide that had been eating a civilization froze in place, mid-spread, and went hard and gray and still, and across 40 million Ashani watching the sky, the thing that had been killing their world simply stopped. On the bridge of the Steadfast, no one spoke for a moment. It was Mott, the young communications officer, who broke the silence, because the channels had lit up, every channel, all at once, from the surface of Tesseril. "Captain," she said, and her voice was not steady now, not at all, and no one minded. "The speaker, the whole planet. They are, Captain, the whole planet is calling at once. The frost stopped. They watched it stop. They are," she put her hand over her mouth, and then took it away, and finished. "They are cheering, Captain. 40 million people. They are cheering." Cora Whitfield sat back down in her chair, slowly, because her legs had gone strange, and she found that she could not quite speak for a moment either. "Aldridge," she said finally. "Status of the growth." "All dormant, Captain," Aldridge said. He was crying, a little, and not hiding it, and not ashamed. Core mass cold and asleep. Every tendril, every cloud, all of it pulling in and going dormant across the whole system. "It is done. It worked. You can, Captain, you can tow it now. The whole thing. It is cold and hard and asleep, and it will stay that way as long as it is cold, and we can wrap the core and tow it out into the deep dark where it came from, and it will sleep there until the stars go out." He laughed, the wet, ragged laugh of a man who has not slept in a week and has just saved 40 million people. "There is no victory here," the Coran said. "There is no victory here." "They were looking for the wrong kind," Whitfield said quietly. "There was never going to be a victory you could win with guns. There was only ever a world you could save with a ship that was built to save things. That is the kind we are." She straightened. "All right. The hard part is done. Now we do the long part. Mott, tell the speaker we are coming down. Medical. Prep for surface contact. That world has 40 million frightened people on it, and a great many of them are sick and starving, and they have been dying for a season, and we are going to spend a while putting that right before we leave. And tactical." She turned to Aldridge. "Start working on how a single ship tows a dormant mass the size of a moon out past the Vorlish line and drops it in the dark. I know you said it could not be done. I have grown rather fond of telling you to do the things that cannot be done." "Aye, Captain," Aldridge said, wiping his face, smiling. "I will find you something." There was a plan, in case the operation failed, and Whitfield had built it as carefully as she had built the operation itself, because a captain who only plans for success is a captain who gets her crew killed. If the well failed, or the cold did not take, or the growth woke instead of slept, the Steadfast would not simply die at Tesseril. It would do the other half of what a rescue ship was for. It would open its great refugee holds, and it would take aboard as many Ashani as it could physically carry, and it would run for the Vorlish line with them, and it would carry the survivors of a dead world out into the dark, where they could begin again somewhere else. It would not be everyone. It could not be everyone. No single ship could carry 40 million people. But it could be tens of thousands, and tens of thousands of survivors is not nothing, is in fact the whole difference between a people that ends and a people that goes on. And Whitfield had been prepared, if it came to it, to make that terrible choice and carry it out. So while Aldridge charged the well and the damage control teams burned the growth off the hull, the Steadfast's medics on the surface were also doing a quieter thing, which was preparing the Ashani to move. They were organizing them, gently, into groups, teaching them where the shuttles would land and how they would board, choosing, with the speaker's help, who would go first if the worst happened. The children and the keepers of the oldest knowledge and the ones who could rebuild. It was grim work, the work of preparing for a failure everyone hoped would not come, and the Ashani understood what it was, and bore it with the quiet dignity that was their nature. And one of the human medics would say afterward, that she had never seen a people face the possible end of everything with less panic and more grace. The speaker walked among her people as they were organized, and she did a thing that a lesser leader would not have thought to do. She did not tell them it was going to work. She did not make promises she could not keep, because she had learned, across a season of dying, that false hope is crueler than no hope at all. Instead, she told them the truth, which was that a ship had come, that it was trying something that had never been done, that it might not work, and that whatever happened, they would face it together, and that the dark, for the first time in a season, was not silent. And the Ashani, hearing the truth, held together far better than they would have held together for a comfortable lie, because there is a particular strength in being told the truth by someone you trust, even a hard truth, especially a hard truth. And the speaker had spent a lifetime earning that trust, and she spent it now, all of it, to keep her people steady through the longest hour any of them had ever lived. For that was the thing about the hour the steadfast spent in the heart of the growth. It was not only the crew who lived it. 40 million Ashani lived it too, on the surface, looking up at a sky where they could not see the ship, or the growth, or the operation, knowing only that somewhere out in the dark, a single vessel was trying to save them, and might be dying in the attempt. They could not help, they could not fight, they could only wait, and hope, the thing they had set aside and picked back up, and waiting and hoping while your fate is decided somewhere you cannot see, is its own kind of unbearable, and they bore it. Because the speaker had asked them to, and because a ship had come. And then the frost on the homeworld stopped creeping. That was how they knew, on the surface, before any message reached them. The pale leading edge of the growth, which had been creeping across the green hemisphere toward the inhabited continent, day after day, for a season, the thing they had all learned to watch with dread, simply stopped. One moment it was advancing, the slow pale death they had measured their remaining days against, and the next moment it was still, and then it was graying, going hard and dormant where it stood, and across the inhabited continent of Tesseril, 40 million Ashani watched the thing that was killing their world stop killing it, and understood, all at once, without being told, that the ship in the dark had not died. The ship in the dark had won. What happened then was the thing that Mott had tried to describe from the bridge, the thing she did not have words for. 40 million people cheering at once. Except that the Ashani did not cheer the way other peoples cheered, loud and wild. The Ashani did a thing that was, in its way, more moving. They went, very nearly all of them, to their gardens. To whatever green thing was nearest, the great old tended gardens and the small private ones and the window boxes and the single potted plants. And they put their hands in the soil, all across a saved world, 40 million people kneeling in the green at once, and they wept, and they planted. It was the deepest thing the Ashani knew how to do, the thing they did to mark what mattered most, and they did it now, all of them, together, on the day the dark answered, and the human medics who were down on the surface to see it would carry the memory of it for the rest of their lives, a whole world on its knees in its gardens, weeping and planting, because a ship had come. The towing of the dormant challenge, growth out of the system, was a feat of a different kind than the operation that had put it to sleep, and it tested the crew of the Steadfast in a way the hour of cold had not, because the hour had been a single held breath, and the tow was a marathon, 40 days of slow, exacting, unglamorous work, the kind of work that wins no songs and earns no medals and is, in the end, the part that actually mattered. The core mass was the size of a small moon. It hung in the cold dark beyond the third planet's orbit, gray and hard and asleep, and it had to be moved, all of it, out past the edge of the system and into the deep dark where it could sleep forever, without ever again drifting into the warmth that would wake it. No ship had ever towed anything the size of a moon. The engineers said it could not be done, and Aldridge, who had grown used to being told that the things he was asked to do could not be done, set about doing it. He built a containment web, a vast lattice of cables and field generators that wrapped the dormant core like a net around a sleeping beast, and he fed the web a steady trickle of cold from the slowly recharging well, so that not one cell of the growth ever felt a degree of warmth on the long journey out, because warmth was the one thing that could wake it, and waking it would undo everything. And then the Steadfast lit its engines, and pulled. It pulled for 40 days. It could not pull hard, pull too hard, and the web would tear, and the dormant mass would break apart and scatter, and scattered cold spores drifting back inward might find the warmth of the sun again and begin the whole nightmare anew. So it pulled gently, agonizingly, a moon-sized sleeping horror dragged through the dark at the pace of a slow walk, and the crew nursed the web every hour of every day, watching for the smallest tear, the smallest leak of warmth, the smallest sign that the thing was beginning to stir. It never stirred. They kept it cold, and they kept it whole, and they pulled it, day after patient day, out past the orbit of the last planet, out past the place where the star's warmth faded into the deep cold, out to the edge of the dark where the growth had first come from, and there, at last, they released it. The containment web opened, and the great gray dormant mass drifted free, on into the dark, away from the sun, away from the warmth, on a course that would carry it into the deep between the stars where it would sleep, cold and harmless, until the stars themselves grew old and died. And when it was gone, when the last of it had faded from the screens, the crew of the Steadfast did not cheer. They were too tired to cheer. They had been 40 days at the slow, exacting work of dragging a sleeping nightmare into the dark, and what they felt was not triumph, but the deep, clean exhaustion of people who have finished a long, hard thing and finished it right. Aldridge logged it in his dry way. Dormant core mass released into interstellar trajectory. No warmth leakage, no fragmentation. Threat permanently neutralized. And then he put his head down on his console and slept for 14 hours. And no one woke him, because he had earned every minute of it. Cora Whitfield stood on her bridge and watched the dark where the growth had gone, and she thought about the difference between the hour and the 40 days. The hour was the part the galaxy would talk about, the bold stroke, the single cold pulse that put the unkillable thing to sleep. But it was the 40 days that had actually saved Tesseril, the slow, unglamorous, patient work of finishing the job all the way, of not just winning, but cleaning up after the win, of dragging the danger so far away that it could never come back. The galaxy loved the hour. The galaxy would always love the hour. But Whitfield had learned, over a long career, that the worlds got saved in the 40 days, in the patient finishing, in the willingness to do the long, boring, careful work after the bold stroke was done, and that a captain who only loved the hour was a captain who left jobs half finished and worlds half saved. She did not leave jobs half finished. She had towed the nightmare all the way into the dark. Only then did she turn the Steadfast for home. It took the Steadfast 40 days to finish what it had started. Putting the growth to sleep had been the work of an hour. Everything after was slower and harder in its own way, and Cora Whitfield would say, long afterward, that the 40 days that followed had mattered as much as the hour that saved the world, because saving a world is not a single act but a long one, and the part everyone remembers is never the part that takes the longest. The Steadfast went down to Tesseril, and its medical teams went out across the dying continent, and they spent weeks tending to the sick and the starving and the half-mad with grief. The Ashani who had spent a season watching their world be eaten and had given up hope and now had to learn, painfully, how to pick it back up. The food printers ran day and night. The water makers ran. The air scrubbers cleaned the spore haze out of the lower atmosphere so that the Ashani could breathe their own sky again. And all the while, the dormant growth hung gray and still across the system, asleep, harmless, waiting to be taken away. And when the long work was done, when the dormant heart of the growth had been dragged out into the deep dark and released, the Steadfast turned back toward Tesseril one last time, and the Vorlish picket, watching from their line, saw the human ship coming back out, and the picket commander, who had hoped, hailed it. "Captain Whitfield," he said, "you crossed my line 40 days ago and told me you would come out clean. The whole galaxy has heard what you did. 11 empires said no, and 1 ship said yes. And a world that was dead is alive." A pause. "I will not inspect your hull. I withdraw the demand. A ship that towed that thing into the dark with its own hands does not need a coward to check its rivets. Pass freely, Captain. And, Captain." Another pause. Longer. "I am ashamed that I did not turn. I want you to know that I am ashamed, because someone should be, and it should be me, and it should not be hidden." "Do not be ashamed," Whitfield said. "Be different. That is worth more than shame. The next world that asks the dark for help, Commander, you turn your ships toward it, the way I turned mine, and you will have repaid this 100 times over. Shame helps no one. A coward who becomes the thing that comes when called helps everyone. Be that. That is all anyone could ask. There was a silence on the channel, and then the Vorlish commander said, quietly, I will be that. You have my word. And the Steadfast passed his line, going out, clean, exactly as its captain had promised. The speaker of Tesseril came up to orbit to see the human ship off, which was a thing no Ashani speaker had done for any outsider in 9,000 years. She stood on the bridge of the Steadfast, an old woman who 40 days ago had been on her knees planting flowers for her people to die looking at, and she looked at Cora Whitfield for a long time, and she did not have the words at first, because some debts are too large for words. You turned, she said finally. When 11 empires would not, you turned. I have asked you why, and you told me, because we asked. But that cannot be the whole of it. Many peoples ask, and are not answered. Why did you answer? Cora Whitfield thought about it, because the speaker deserved a real answer, and not an easy one. Because a long time ago, she said, my people learned what it is to call into the dark and be answered with silence. We were alone, once, and afraid, and we asked, and for a long time no one came, and we decided, when we finally clawed our way up out of that whatever else we became, we would never be the silence. We would be the ones who come, not because the asking always deserves an answer, because a galaxy where the dark answers is a better galaxy than one where it does not, and someone has to be the proof that it can. We decided to be that proof. That is all the Steadfast is, speaker. That is all I am. We are the proof that when a world calls into the dark, sometimes the dark turns its bow around and comes. She paused, and almost smiled. Plant your gardens, speaker. The real ones, now, not the last ones, the first ones. Your world is yours again. Make it green. And the speaker of Tesseril, who had planted a last garden and now would plant a first one, bowed to the human captain in the old deep way of her people, the bow the Ashani gave only to those they would remember for 9,000 years, and she went back down to her living world, and the Steadfast lit its engines and turned its bow toward home and the long dark between the stars. It went out the way it had come in, alone, a single human ship that was also a warship, that was also a thing built to save, carrying its mercy back out into the dark, toward the next world that would call, and the next, and the next, because the dark was full of worlds that would call, and the Steadfast had decided, a long time ago, that it would always be the thing that answered. Behind it, on a world that should have been dead, the Ashani planted gardens, and the gardens grew green, and the children who would grow up in them would be told, for the next 9,000 years, the story of the season the world was dying, and 11 empires said no, and one ship turned its bow around and came. They would not call it the season the world almost ended. They would call it the season the dark answered. The story of what the Steadfast did at Tesseril spread through the dark faster than any spore ever had. And it spread because the 11 empires that had said no could not stop telling it, the way people cannot stop touching a bruise. The Koran, who had said there is no victory here, heard that a single human rescue ship had put the unkillable thing to sleep and towed it into the dark, and the Koran were a martial people who understood, better than most, the weight of a thing done that they had said could not be done. They did not apologize, because the Koran did not apologize, but they did a thing that for the Koran was larger than an apology. They opened their archives and they studied what the Steadfast had done, the cold, the well, the patience, the willingness to be the bait, and they began, slowly, to build rescue ships of their own, and to teach their warriors that there was a kind of victory their old accounting had never been able to see. A victory you won not by killing the enemy, but by saving the people the enemy would have killed. It took them a generation, but they learned it, and the learning began at Tesseril, with a thing they had said could not be done by a ship that had refused to do their arithmetic. The Vorlish picket commander kept his word. The next time a world called into the dark from beyond his line, a world being eaten by something his arithmetic said was hopeless, he did not run the arithmetic. He turned his ships toward it, the way the human captain had turned hers, and he crossed his own quarantine going in, and he carried with him the thing Whitfield had given him, which was not a method, but a permission, the permission to be the one who comes. He saved that world, He was not as good at it as the humans were. No one was, yet. But he came, and the coming was the thing. And a child on that world would grow up telling a story about a Vorlish commander who turned his ships around, never knowing that the commander had learned it from a human captain who had learned it from her own people's long memory of being alone in the dark. That was the thing the Steadfast had really done at Tesseril, and Cora Whitfield understood it, in the long quiet of the voyage home, better than she had understood it going in. She had thought she was saving a world. She had saved a world. But the world was the smaller part of it. The larger part was the story, and what the story did to everyone who heard it, the slow-spreading proof that the dark could answer, that the arithmetic of no was not the only arithmetic, that a single ship that refused to count, lives the way the empires counted them, could do a thing that made 11 empires reconsider what they were for. She kept the flower, she had it dried and pressed and set behind glass, and she fixed it to the wall of her ready room, where she could see it from her chair. And on the hard days, the days when the next world that called was too far, or too dangerous, or too far gone, the days when the arithmetic of no began to look reasonable even to her, she would look at the flower, and she would remember the child who had given it to her before she had even won, and she would remember that the whole point of the thing she did was to give it to people who had not earned it, and might never repay it, because they were drowning, and she had a boat. She commanded the Steadfast for another 19 years, and she answered a great many calls in those years, and not all of them ended as well as Tesseril, because the dark is the dark, and not every drowning person can be reached in time. But she answered them. That was the thing she held to through all of it, the thing she had told the Vorlish commander, and the young rating, and the speaker of the dying world. You do not get to choose whether the asking deserves an answer. You only get to choose whether you are the silence, or the thing that comes. She chose, every time, for 19 years, to be the thing that comes, and the dark was a little less dark for it, world by world, call by call, flower by flower. And on Tesseril, the world that should have been dead, the gardens grew back. The garden of first roots, where the gray dormant edge of the growth had reached, was tended back to green over a generation, scar, by the families who had tended it for 9,000 years, and would tend it for 9,000 more. And at its edge, on the plaza where a human shuttle had once landed, before anyone knew whether the world would live, there grew a small bright garden that the Ashani did not call a death garden, because it had not become one. The garden the speaker had finished planting on the day she let herself hope again. The Ashani gave it a name in their own tongue that did not translate well, the way the best of their names never did, but the closest the human linguists ever came to it was the garden where the dark answered, and the Ashani tended it with particular care, and they brought their children to it, and they told them the story, so that for the next 9,000 years, no Ashani child would grow up believing, the way their parents had nearly come to believe, that a call into the dark must always be met with silence. Because once, in the season their world was dying, 11 empires had said no, and one ship had turned its bow around and come.